The invisible power. There is a hidden force shaping every breakthrough, every transformation, and every moment of unexpected progress. Yet it remains invisible to most people because they are taught to believe that true victory only comes through relentless effort. From childhood, we are conditioned to push harder, resist every obstacle, and fight until the very last moment. But this script challenges that belief entirely. What if the very thing holding someone back is not a lack of strength, but an excess of force? Imagine a person clinging desperately to a rope that is burning their hands, convinced that holding tighter is the only option. This opening introduces the radical idea that strategic surrender may be the missing element that finally allows life to move in the direction they have been trying so hard to reach. When viewers examine their own lives, they will likely find moments where effort alone brought more exhaustion than progress. Perhaps it was a job where every attempt to excel only led to deeper frustration, or a relationship where trying to fix everything turned into a cycle of emotional strain. These are situations where the common belief of push harder becomes a trap, creating tension instead of solutions. This paragraph invites the audience to recognize themselves within this universal struggle. Instead of portraying surrender as giving up, it reframes it as an overlooked form of intelligence. The ability to understand that forcing outcomes often blocks the very flow that leads to genuine growth, clarity, and unexpected breakthroughs. The idea of invisible power becomes clearer as we explore how strategic surrender challenges the cultural pressure to always remain in control. In reality, control is often an illusion that drains energy and distorts perspective. People cling to routines, relationships, or goals simply because they fear the consequences of letting go. But this gripping tends to close doors rather than open them. Strategic surrender, on the other hand, is a conscious choice to step back, observe the entire landscape, and make room for what cannot emerge under pressure. By presenting this contrast, the narrative encourages viewers to question the assumptions they were taught about strength, revealing that sometimes the strongest act a person can take is to release what no longer serves their progress. To make this concept even more relatable, the viewer is invited into a scenario almost everyone has experienced, the moment when insisting only intensifies the struggle. Whether it is trying to convince someone who has already made up their mind, or fighting for an opportunity that continually resists, the harder they push, the more distant the outcome becomes. This paradox is not evidence of inadequacy. It is a sign that the chosen strategy is misaligned with the situation. This paragraph portrays strategic surrender as a shift from force to intelligence, from resistance to flow, from emotional turbulence to grounded clarity. It prepares the audience to consider that stepping back is not the absence of effort, but the redirection of it. As the narrative unfolds, viewers are promised a revolutionary framework, one that reveals how retreating at the right moment can lead to opportunities previously hidden. Instead of glorifying struggle for its own sake, this approach teaches that timing, awareness, and emotional balance play a far greater role in achieving meaningful victory. The audience begins to understand that surrender is not something that happens to them. It is something they choose with intention. By offering a vision of success rooted in clarity rather than force, the script establishes a foundation for deeper exploration of how strategic surrender can transform not only outcomes, but the entire approach to life's challenges. This final paragraph of the introduction reinforces the central message. Strategic surrender is not about losing. It is about gaining access to possibilities blocked by rigid persistence. By inviting viewers to examine their habits, their past struggles, and their instinct to push harder, the narrative creates curiosity and anticipation for what comes next. They are encouraged to see surrender not as the opposite of victory, but as the gateway to it. This opening closes with a compelling promise that by understanding the invisible power of letting go, they will discover a pathway to progress that is more aligned, more intelligent, and far more transformative than anything they have tried before. Strategic surrender challenges one of the most deeply rooted assumptions in modern culture: the belief that success is built solely on relentless pressure, constant effort, and the refusal to bend under any circumstance. But if you look closely at the defining moments in the lives of entrepreneurs, leaders, thinkers, or ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. A different truth quietly emerges. Breakthroughs rarely happen in the middle of internal turmoil or in the height of resistance. They tend to appear when a person recognizes that the path they are walking, no matter how much effort they invest, has reached a point of diminishing returns. This is where strategic surrender reveals its strength, not as a collapse, but as a shift, a conscious recalibration of direction. It is the discernment that pushing harder sometimes traps a person deeper in the problem, preventing them from seeing the alternatives waiting just outside the tunnel of insistence. Strategic surrender requires awareness, humility, and the courage to admit that clarity is often found not in forcing, but in letting go. When someone steps back deliberately, they do not shrink. They rise above the storm to regain perspective. Historically, countless innovators experienced their major breakthroughs only after surrendering outdated methods that once worked but no longer served their evolving vision. Strategic surrender becomes a disciplined act of realignment, making room for insight, renewal, and the discovery of possibilities hidden beneath the noise of constant struggle. You see this principle unfolding in the stories of entrepreneurs who spent years pursuing a business model that refused to grow. They poured resources, time, and emotional energy into perfecting something that, despite all dedication, simply was not meant to flourish in its original form. It was only when they surrendered their attachment to that specific version of the plan that innovation became possible. Suddenly, new ideas emerged, new markets appeared, and new strategies became visible. Strategies that had been invisible while they were locked in the need to force results. The same dynamic appears in relationships where tension builds, not because people don't care, but because each person is trying to control the emotional outcome. When one individual surrenders the need to steer every interaction, the atmosphere shifts. Communication becomes less defensive, empathy grows stronger, and connection becomes easier. Even within personal development, real transformation often comes when individuals surrender perfectionism and unrealistic expectations. When they stop forcing themselves to be something that contradicts their internal rhythm, growth becomes organic. These examples illustrate that surrender is not the end point of effort. It is the correction of effort. It is the moment when the emotional fog begins to lift and intuition regains its voice. Strategic surrender clears mental clutter, allowing the mind to operate with precision instead of panic. It is the decision to stop watering a tree that no longer grows, so energy can be redirected towards seeds that still have life within them. Psychologically, strategic surrender creates internal conditions that the mind cannot access while trapped in resistance. Stress, which narrows perception, begins to dissolve. Cognitive flexibility increases, allowing a person to see solutions from angles that previously felt inaccessible. Emotional resilience becomes stronger, not weaker, because the individual is no longer burning energy fighting what cannot be controlled. When someone surrenders the illusion of total control, they unlock a renewed clarity that empowers effective decision-making. Practically speaking, strategic surrender prevents the exhaustion that comes from stubborn persistence and replaces it with intentional action. It redirects time, emotional bandwidth, and mental focus toward endeavors that align with long-term vision rather than short-term frustration. Strategic surrender creates the space required for new opportunities to enter naturally. Opportunities that force often pushes away. When someone recognizes that a situation has completed its purpose, surrendering becomes an act of wisdom rather than defeat. It is the moment where the path forward sharpens into view. Instead of fighting uphill battles, individuals begin to move with the rhythm of their lives instead of against it. Strategic surrender becomes the turning point between stagnation and growth, between chaos and clarity, between a life shaped by resistance and a life shaped by alignment. It is a bridge, guiding a person from the noise of insistence to the calm of insight where the next chapter can finally begin. There comes a moment in every journey when persistence stops being a strength and begins turning into a silent weight we can no longer carry. It sneaks up on us slowly, disguised as dedication, disguised as responsibility, disguised as the belief that we must keep pushing no matter what the cost. But deep inside, something wiser whispers a different truth. Sometimes the path forward begins with a pause, Sometimes the next breakthrough arrives the moment we loosen our grip. This is the essence of strategic surrender, not the collapse of our efforts, but the honest recognition that our energy, focus, and emotional resources are finite. And when we insist on forcing what no longer flows, we trap ourselves in invisible battles that drain our spirit. Strategic surrender begins when we finally acknowledge that stepping back is not failure, but a deliberate choice to stop fighting what's resisting us and start aligning with what's calling us. As we explore this idea more deeply, we begin to see that many of life's greatest transformations come not from pushing harder, but from removing the pressure we've placed on ourselves. Think about the moments when clarity suddenly arrived only after you stopped trying to control every outcome. It's almost paradoxical. The answers we search for so desperately often appear only when we allow ourselves to stop searching. Strategic surrender works the same way. It opens a quiet space within us where intuition can finally be heard, where new perspectives can take shape, and where the weight of constant striving finally lifts. And in that empty space, often uncomfortable at first, something remarkable happens. Creativity expands. Emotional resilience strengthens. Inner peace, once buried under layers of tension, begins to rise again. This surrender is not an ending, but an invitation to rediscover the power of flow. To practice true strategic surrender, we must first recognize the emotional signals that tell us a cycle is closing, the exhaustion that doesn't go away with rest, the frustration that repeats no matter how hard we try, the quiet sense that we're forcing something that isn't meant to move in this moment. Instead of judging these signs as weakness, we can view them as inner wisdom calling for a recalibration. They are not signs to quit life or abandon our dreams. They are signs to release what is draining us, so we can return with clarity instead of desperation. When we respond to these signals with compassion instead of resistance, we create room for a powerful shift in our relationship with achievement. We begin to understand that surrender doesn't diminish us. It refines us. It sharpens our vision. It teaches us which battles matter and which ones are simply distractions wearing the mask of purpose. Strategic surrender also requires emotional honesty, the courage to admit when a method, a mindset, or a timeline isn't working anymore. Many people remain stuck not because they lack strength, but because they cling to outdated strategies that once served them but no longer do. They fear stepping back because they believe it means starting over, when in truth, it means starting smarter. When we allow ourselves to release old strategies, we create space for new ones to emerge. Strategies shaped by maturity, lived experience, and a deeper understanding of who we are today. This kind of surrender is not passive. It is deeply intentional. It asks us to trust that stepping back for a moment can propel us much farther than pushing forward blindly ever could. And in that trust, we rediscover the quiet confidence that success does not require constant force. It requires alignment. Once we surrender strategically, the next step is re-engagement. Not from exhaustion, but from renewed strength. Think of it as stepping back into the arena with a different posture. Instead of tightening your grip, you loosen your expectations. Instead of fighting for control, you work with what flows naturally. This re-engagement feels lighter, more intuitive, almost as if life begins cooperating with you rather than resisting your efforts. Opportunities appear that you couldn't see before. Solutions arise that once felt impossible. You reconnect with your purpose from a place of wholeness instead of pressure. And remarkably, what once felt like a losing battle begins to move again, not because you forced it, but because you shifted your relationship with the struggle. Strategic surrender clears the fog, allowing momentum to return in its own time. As you integrate this new understanding, you realize that strategic surrender is not about giving up, it's about giving space. Space for insight, space for healing, space for divine timing to unfold without the interference of panic or impatience. And in this space, something profound happens. Your identity begins to shift. You no longer see yourself as someone who must constantly fight to earn progress. Instead, you see yourself as someone who is allowed to rest, allowed to redirect, allowed to trust. This shift in identity is what unlocks your greatest victories. Because when your actions no longer come from fear of failure, but from clarity and alignment, the outcome naturally transforms. Strategic surrender becomes a silent superpower, one that leads not to defeat, but to the kind of victory that feels deeply earned, gracefully timed and undeniably yours. There comes a moment in every journey when the path ahead begins revealing what force alone could never uncover. This is the stage where strategic surrender evolves into strategic clarity, where everything you released in the previous steps begins making space for insight that had been blocked by pressure, fear, and noise. In this phase, you start to recognize patterns you once ignored, opportunities that once felt distant, and lessons that once seemed hidden beneath frustration. It isn't that the world suddenly changed. It's that you changed your way of seeing it. And with this new clarity comes a deeper understanding. Surrender wasn't the end of the battle, but the beginning of a transformation that continues unfolding quietly, reshaping the way you approach challenges, relationships, and even your own internal narrative. This clarity invites you to re-examine the beliefs that guided your previous decisions. You begin noticing how often you chased outcomes out of fear, not purpose. How many times you forced progress because you felt behind, not because it was the right time to act. Strategic surrender now becomes a mirror, revealing your old motivations with remarkable honesty. And while this honesty may feel uncomfortable at first, it's also liberating. When you finally identify what drove your patterns, pressure, insecurity, the desire for validation, you gain the power to rewrite them. You are no longer reacting to life. You are responding to it from a place of consciousness. This shift is subtle but profound, marking the moment when you reclaim authorship of your journey. With your newfound awareness, you begin noticing that the things you once clung to no longer hold the same emotional weight. The deadlines that once felt urgent now reveal themselves as illusions. The expectations you once carried as obligations begin dissolving into choices. In this space, you reconnect with the version of yourself that existed before exhaustion shaped your decisions. And from this renewed place, you can finally ask the questions that matter. What am I truly trying to create? What aligns with who I am now, not who I used to be? These questions act like internal guidance systems, redirecting you away from unnecessary battles and toward actions that nourish your purpose rather than drain it. As you deepen into this phase, you also begin to understand the timing of things. Why certain doors stayed closed despite your efforts, why certain relationships faded, and why certain opportunities required patience instead of pressure. You realize that surrender was never about giving up, but about aligning yourself with the rhythm of your own growth. Some processes cannot be rushed because you are not meant to enter them until you are ready. And readiness isn't about skill or intelligence. It's about emotional capacity. It's about having the resilience, clarity, and peace necessary to sustain what you once tried to force. This is why surrender leads to better timing. It synchronizes your inner world with the unfolding of your outer reality. Strategic clarity also reveals the importance of conserving your energy for what truly matters. You begin recognizing which battles deserve your presence and which ones only drain your spirit. Not every conflict is a calling. Not every opportunity is meant for you. Not every challenge requires your immediate intervention. As this understanding settles in, you start choosing your commitments more intentionally. You stop scattering your energy across countless tasks and redirect it toward actions that align with your deeper values. And the result is remarkable. You accomplish more with less effort, not because the work becomes lighter, but because you become aligned. Your focus sharpens. Your motivation stabilizes. Your emotional energy stops leaking into things that no longer belong to your journey. This is the stage where you begin witnessing the first real rewards of strategic surrender. You notice unexpected pathways opening, not through force but through alignment. People come into your life who reflect your growth. Opportunities appear that match your new level of clarity. Obstacles that once felt impossible begin dissolving or redirecting you to something better. And slowly, you realize that you're no longer controlled by urgency, fear, or the weight of expectation. You are guided by something deeper, inner stability. This stability becomes the foundation upon which your next victories will be built, And as you step forward with this quiet confidence, you finally see that strategic surrender was never the act of stepping back. It was the act of stepping into who you were meant to become. This is the stage where you begin witnessing the first real rewards of strategic surrender. You notice unexpected pathways opening, not through force, but through alignment. People come into your life who reflect your growth. Opportunities appear that match your new level of clarity. Obstacles that once felt impossible begin dissolving or redirecting you to something better. And slowly, you realize that you are no longer controlled by urgency, fear, or the weight of expectation. You are guided by something deeper, inner stability. This stability becomes the foundation upon which your next victories will be built. And as you step forward with this quiet confidence, you finally see that strategic surrender was never the act of stepping back. It was the act of stepping into who you were meant to become. In the stillness that follows the turning point, she feels a quiet but undeniable shift rising from deep inside her chest, as if something that had been asleep for years finally opened its eyes. The path ahead is unfamiliar, yet it no longer feels threatening. It feels like an invitation. Her pulse steadies, her breathing evens, and for the first time in a long while her steps no longer feel like an attempt to escape the past, but a gentle movement toward a future she is finally willing to consider. Around her, the world seems softer, almost as if it recognizes her effort and whispers, "Keep going." This moment, fragile and powerful, becomes the silent beginning of a new chapter she didn't think she deserved. Her friends walk beside her, not as rescuers and not as reminders of what she endured, but as companions who understand the unspoken language of healing. They do not rush her pace. They do not ask her to explain. They simply match the rhythm of her quiet transformation, allowing her to rediscover herself without pressure. Their laughter carries a warmth she hadn't felt in months, a lightness that makes her chest loosen just a little. And in that gentle company, she relearns something essential. That healing doesn't always arrive as a breakthrough. Sometimes it comes in the form of presence, of footsteps aligned with yours, of people who choose to stay even when your heart feels complicated. As they continue walking, she feels memories rise, not to hurt her but to show her how far she has already come. The setbacks, the nights she thought she would not make it, the mornings when even breathing felt like a task, none of them hold the same weight anymore. Instead, they become proof of her endurance. She begins to understand that strength isn't loud. It isn't heroic in the way movies portray. True strength is waking up one more day. It's choosing to move when your heart still trembles. It's letting the sun touch the parts of you kept hidden for too long. And as her steps grow steadier, she feels that truth settling into her bones. A soft breeze moves through the trees ahead, carrying the scent of something new, possibility maybe, or simply the reminder that life continues even when we pause. She lifts her eyes and notices how the path widens, opening into a space she has never seen before. It isn't dramatic, it isn't overwhelming, but it is enough to make her feel a small spark of anticipation. Her friends notice the way her shoulders rise and fall as she exhales, lighter this time, almost relieved. And without needing to speak, they know that this is the moment she begins to reclaim herself, not in one sudden leap, but in the quiet acceptance that she is allowed to move forward without knowing every answer. By the time they reach the next bend in the road, she realizes that healing doesn't demand perfection, only presence. The pain hasn't vanished, and the doubts haven't dissolved, but something inside her has shifted. She no longer feels defined by what happened. Instead, she feels defined by her ability to keep going, to open her heart again, even if just a little. Her friends walk in harmony with her renewed rhythm, forming a circle of silent encouragement. And in that shared moment, she understands that hope doesn't arrive with trumpets or fireworks. It arrives in small breaths, in steady steps, in the simple decision to continue. And as the world opens around her, she finally allows herself to believe that she is becoming someone stronger, softer, and far more alive than she ever expected.